Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon deck profile video. So today I'm going to be taking a look at BT07, and BT07 offers us a lot of good cards to be working with, especially on a budget. And today I'm going to be covering a more budget-friendly version of Blue Hybrids. So Blue Hybrids is already looking to be one of the more powerful decks to come out of BT07, just because of all of the tech and tools that we have to try to stop and limit some of the opponent's actions, while we're just trying to aggress onto the opponent. So without further ado, onto the deck profile. Starting off with the Digitama, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Kiarumon. So Kiarumon could probably be Upamon, but Upamon is a more expensive card, and Kiarumon works at trying to help us draw cards on a budget. So Kiarumon has this ability where during your turn, once per turn, when you get rid of one of the opponent's inheritable sources through one of your abilities, then we get to draw a card, and we have lots of different ways at attacking the opponent's inheritable sources to be able to use this ability to help us draw cards, and drawing cards is good, making the deck more consistent. I especially like how Kiarumon interacts with some of our level 3s to try to act as good anti-meta cards, just because we don't actually have to attack with them in order to be able to draw a card, actually adding some fluidity to what we want to be using Kiarumon for. And then as far as the 5th Digitama of the deck goes, you don't really need a 5th Digitama if you don't want to run one, but I do like running one, so I'm going to be running one copy of Vikemon to just act as a solid way to try to DP boost our Digimon to make them a little bit stronger than they normally would. But this is kind of a flex spot, and it can really be any Digitama you want to be using if you're going to be using a 5th one at all. Next, on to the level 3s, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Strabimon. So this is the BT04 version of Strabimon, and this card is really good at helping dig out our parts and pieces. So his on-play ability lets us check the top 3 cards of our deck, and then we could add one Digimon that's a hybrid and or blue tamer from among them into our hand, and that's just really good, allowing us to try to find the parts and pieces that we're looking for because, well, we're a hybrid-based deck, and we want to find our hybrids and we want to find our tamers to make our hybrids even more efficient. Next, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Syakomon. So Syakomon is going to be one of the anti-meta cards we're mostly going to want to have sit on the field, but we actually could aggress with this card just because he does have some slightly higher DP than your average level 3. But again, he's just the anti-meta card to sit on the field to try to reduce and limit the opponent's actions because of his ability to prevent the opponent from reducing their Digivolution costs, and that could be really annoying depending on the opponent, and that's kind of the point on why we want to run the card. But in tandem with Syakomon, we also have 3 copies of Madoki Betamon to again act as another anti-meta card to stop it and limit some of the opponent's actions. Madoki Betamon is stopping them from gaining memory, except from their tamers, so it stops some of those memory manipulating shenanigans to make their plays even less efficient, especially paired up with a Syakomon on the field. It could be very annoying for the opponents to try to use their cards efficiently, and that's kind of the whole point on trying to ruin that efficiency while we're not really losing any efficiency ourselves. Next, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Nemon. So Nemon is probably best in blue hybrids just because we have more tamers with inheritable abilities to take advantage of his on-play ability with. So when we play Nemon, we get to play a tamer with an inheritable ability from our hand for free, and that's just a lot of value off of one card for only 3 memory. And then on top of that, he also has a good secondary ability just because we are going to be a little bit more on the aggressive side with our lower level Digimon, so they're going to be dying more often than not, and we want them to kind of die just because Nemon's second ability allows us to reuse some of our tamers from our trash. And talking about value, the last level 3 I'm going to be using is 4 copies of Bokumon. So Bokumon is doing the exact same thing as Strabimon, but better. So his on-play ability allows us to check the top 5 instead of the top 3, and we still get to add a hybrid, but we also can add possibly a 10 warriors if we're running any as well, and still adding 1 tamer from among them into our hand, and then the rest go to the bottom. So still being able to dig out 2 cards, but seeing more cards and possibly having more targets just makes Bokumon a really powerful digging tool for the deck. And then on top of that, he has his own passive ability to help play our cards even more efficiently, where during your turn, when one of your Digimon digivolves off of a tamer, then we get to gain 2 memory, making most of our evolutions into our hybrids essentially free, adding extra value into what we could possibly do in terms of how powerful our turns can be. Next, on to the level 4s, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Kendo Gurumon. So this is the BT04 version of Kendo Guruman, and we're really only trying to use this card for his when attacking ability. So yes, he is still a hybrid that we could search, and yes, he could still Digivolve on top of a Tamer, even though his Digivolution is a little bit less efficient than some of the others. His when attacking ability more than makes up for it, because we get to bounce one of the opponent's level 3 Digimon back to their hand. So we need some extra way to try to control the opponent's field, and this is a perfect way at trying to get rid of those pesky level 3s. So we could try to get rid of their anti-meta level 3s and try to get rid of their Pokemons if they're running any as well, because we could stop them from doing anything, but we can't necessarily get them off the field, and sometimes we need them to get off the field to be able to make our plays possible. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Kumamon. So Kumamon is basically Lobomon, but better for what this deck is trying to do. So he's doing all the same things that Lobomon can do, except he has the nice added benefit of a when Digivolving ability that doesn't even require us to Digivolve on top of a Tamer. So his when Digivolving ability allows us to trash one of the opponent's inheritable sources from the bottom of one of their Digimon, allowing us to easily trigger our Kiarumon and try to help set up our Korikakumons to stunlock the opponent's Digimon. So he's just a good card with lots of different synergy based on how the deck wants to be played. And speaking of our Korikakumons, next I'm going to be running 4 copies of Korikakumon. So this is going to be one of the more powerful cards in the deck, and he has lots of different ways on how we could use him. That's only adding to his potential power. So we can Digivolve him for 3 off of a level 3, for 1 off of a level 4, or for 2 off of one of our Tamers. So just that level of utility makes him a very good card because he's almost never a dead card in our hand. And then on top of that, his when Digivolving ability is what we really want to try to take advantage of, where if we Digivolved him on top of a Tommy or a hybrid, then we could do Stunlock one of the opponent's Digimon that doesn't have any Digivolution sources. So taking away the ability to attack or block is just very powerful, allowing us to safely aggress onto them while they can't aggress onto us. And then as far as the level 5s of the deck, I'm only going to be running 4 copies of Beowulfmon, because this is really the only level 5 that we need. So he has the nice ability to reduce his evolution cost by 2 if we Digivolved him on top of a Tamer stack. So going from our Tamer to a level 4 hybrid to Beowulfmon, Beowulfmon will only cost 1, making him a very easy card to go up into. And we want to go up into him because we want to try to take advantage of his when attacking ability to help control the field while refilling our hand with potential Digimon that we want to reuse. So his when attacking ability more specifically states that we get to return one of our hybrids from his inheritables to our hand to bounce one of the opponent's level 4 or lower Digimon, adding some more extra control elements into the deck to try to deal with problems we might not be able to deal with otherwise, on top of the fact that we're adding hybrids to our hand to be able to reuse with some of our Tamers, so we could try to make better use of our Tamers to be a little bit more aggressive with. And then as far as the level 6s go, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Vikemon. So I think Vikemon is a really solid card at allowing us to deal some extra damage, but this could be any level 6 you feel like you want to use that you might feel like best helps with this deck's overall game plan. Vikemon, in my eyes, as a budget card is actually really solid, especially in this deck because we're already attacking the opponent's inheritables and trying to make their Digimon not have any, and Vikemon is another card to reward us for that type of strategy, where he'll give himself 1000 DP and security tech +1, allowing us to use Vikemon to punch the opponent's security even harder than some of our other cards, with a higher chance of success on living through their security, especially since we have easy ways to get up into them, thanks to Beowulfmon only evoing for 1 if we used a Tamer stack. Next, on to the options, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Howling Memory Boost. So Howling Memory Boost is another card to try to strip the opponent's inheritable sources and stunlock their Digimon all in one card, with the added bonus of having a delay ability to give us 2 memory at a later turn, so that way we can make some very powerful follow-up plays with it and try to reduce some of the opponent's actions as well. Next, I'm going to be running 1 copy of Ice Ball. So Ice Ball is just one of the best blue options that we have, and we can only run 1 because it got limited to 1. But we still want to run it because it can help stop the opponent's aggression by giving all of the opponent's Digimon, it doesn't even matter where they're coming from, the ability where when they attack they lose 2 memory, so it could really de-incentivize the opponent from wanting to aggress into us while we're aggressing into them. And then the last option of the deck is going to be 3 copies of Hammer Spark. So Hammer Spark is still just a solid card at gaining some instant tempo for its ability to help us gain 1 memory, and its security ability to try to help take away some of the opponent's tempo by allowing us to gain 2 memory. And then lastly, onto the Tamers, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Matt Ishida. So this should be Davis, but Davis is a little bit out of our price range in terms of a budget deck, but thankfully we have Matt Ishida as a good backup just because we're looking for a generic memory fixing Tamer that's in blue, and Matt is fulfilling that role quite nicely, while also having a little bit of synergy with the deck, just because we could hard play some of our blue Digimon to also try to suspend this Tamer and strip some of the opponent's inheritable sources away. And speaking of stripping the opponent's inheritable sources away, next I'm going to be running 3 copies of Sora and Joe. So Sora and Joe can help us gain some additional memory for the opponent having a Digimon with no inheritables, which we could easily set up, and we could easily try to keep them from having any inheritables because we could stun lock their Digimon so they can't try to attack it and suicide them into our security. And then on top of that, it also is a really good card at stripping some of the opponent's inheritables as well. When our blue Digimon are attacking, we could suspend this Tamer to trash up to 2 from the bottom of one of the opponent's Digimon, so we just have easy, consistent ways at stripping the opponent of their inheritable sources to make Korikakumon and effects like his as live as often as we possibly can. And speaking of our Korikakumon and making that stun locking ability live as often as we can, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Tommy. So Tommy is the most important Tamer in the deck just because he's the Tamer that we're going to want to be digivolving on more often than not. So he has a nice on-play ability for when we actually play him to strip 3 sources from the bottom of one of the opponent's Digimon, so that's just a lot of sources being stripped all at once, to put them in that state where we could use Korikakumon to stun lock their Digimon. And then we want to try to take advantage of his inheritable ability of when attacking once per turn until the end of the opponent's turn, one of their Digimon with no Digivolution sources can't attack or block, allowing us to have a recursive way to stun lock the opponent's Digimon. And then the last Tamer of the deck is going to be 2 copies of Koji. So Koji, for the way this deck is kind of built, we're not really going to be using him outside of the fact that he's just another Tamer with an inheritable ability. But because he's a Tamer with an inheritable ability, it still makes him a relatively valuable card. So when you fully upgrade the deck, you could think about using Magna Gurum, but I just think his inheritable ability is good enough to use off of our Tamers, and it makes our Nemon a little bit more valuable. So the inheritable ability that we're trying to gain off of the card is during our turn once per turn when we add a card to our hand. So whether this is drawing through a card effect or using Beowulfmon, it doesn't necessarily matter. We get to gain 1 memory, and this Digimon can't be blocked for the turn, allowing us to have easy ways to aggress onto the opponent while gaining some additional memory. And then we do have lots of other tech and tools to be working with depending on what your budget is and what cards you want to play and how you want to play the deck. So if you want it, you could invest in Upamon just because Upamon is still one of the best generic Digitamas to be using to help us draw cards, but I think Kyaramon is good enough as is, but Upamon does have his own pros based on how you could build your deck. Then we do also have some other versions of Strabimon that we can incorporate just because all of the Strabimons are relatively good at trying to help our hybrids do hybrid things because they're actually level 3 hybrids to try to take advantage of our level 4 hybrids a little bit better with because we have different options on how we could evolve. And speaking of options on how we could use our cards, we even have another Strabimon from BT07 to help try to dig out some of our parts and pieces, but unfortunately he's only digging out 1 card, where the others, including Vikemon, can dig out 2. So I don't necessarily think he's that great of a digger, but he also has an inheritable ability to try to help play our Koji if we want to play a little bit more Koji focused. And if we are trying to play a little bit more Koji focus, then we also have the Kendo Gurumon that goes with Koji to try to give himself jamming so that way he could safely aggress onto the opponent's security. But if you just want to also think about trying to run the Ancient package, then we also have the promo Lobomon to use. This is a really good card to be using off of our other 2 Strabimons, just because we could try to take advantage of their inheritable abilities a little bit better. But this Lobomon does make playing our Ancient even easier, and we could even combo this with Koji like Red can combo with Takuya. And the Ancient we're going to try to take advantage of is going to be Ancient Garurumon. Even though Blue does have a budget Ancient that you could be using, I don't necessarily think that card is that great, but Ancient Garurumon is an absolutely fantastic card at just trying to deal some extra damage onto the opponent. But we are playing a lot with reducing the opponent's inheritable sources, so we could play a little bit more into that sub-theme and run something like Hexablaumon to try to continuously stunlock the opponent's Digimon. But if you want to deal just some extra damage, then we could try to run Azulongmon, because we could get the opponent to have lots of Digimon without inheritable sources, and Azulongmon is a good card to take advantage of that by allowing us to cheaply go up into him and to deal a lot of damage all at once, because he'll gain security attack +1 for each of the opponent's Digimon without inheritable sources, acting as that big punch factor. And then another really good budget-friendly option is going to be the promo Vikemon. So this Vikemon is a really good card to just help stunlock the opponent's Digimon, on top of the fact that when he attacks, we get to bounce one of the Digimon that they have with no Digivolution sources, acting as some additional removal on all stages. So that's just making him a really valuable card to use. Now, he is a little bit weaker than the Vikemon we're already running, but the amount of control that he could offer and provide could easily make up for the lack of damage. And if you kind of want an all-encompassing card that just makes sense to run in a blue hybrids deck, then we even have Magna Gurum to act as not only a good control tool, but a good aggro tool as well. And if you do want to run a level 7 in the deck, you can. Susanamon is a really good card to go in the deck, just because, well, it makes sense because we're already running lots of Tamers and we're already running lots of hybrids, so he's a good card to think about using. But we could also use any of the Omnimons if we really wanted to, that can Digivolve off of blue. Mostly the BT05 Omnimon, just because the Unsuspend and Blitz can help close out the game, and if we are unable to close out the game, then we could take advantage of his protection ability, especially in combination with Magna Gurumon's being under Koji, to add some extra level 6s into his inheritable source to be able to protect himself even longer, to apply constant pressure onto the opponent depending on the matchup. And then we do have lots of powerful options that we could run, so Forbidden Trident is actually a pretty solid card because we're going to be aggressing with our lower level Digimon more often than not, so having a good way at ensuring that they're going to be surviving is already pretty nice, on top of the fact that it's adding an extra control element into the deck to try to bounce those pesky rookies to get them off the field. Then we do have Blue Memory Boost to act as some extra consistency, so that way we could try to find our parts and pieces while having a Memory Boost for its delay ability to gain some instant memory at a later turn to make more powerful pushes with. And then we do have just a whole bunch of other bounce effects that we could be running in option form. We have Cocytus Breath, Absolute Blast, Rattlestar. There's just a whole bunch of them that we could try to take advantage of if we need some extra defense, not only for our security, but just to try to get rid of threats we might not be able to deal with otherwise in option form. And then we do have some other Tamers that we could think about running depending on the synergies and types of cards you want to be supporting. So obviously the best Tamer that we could add into the deck is going to be Davis, but Davis is a little bit out of our price range, so Matt is doing a good enough job as is, but Matt should be Davis just because his on-play ability to be a consistency tool to try to dig out some of our blue and green Digimon is just super good, on top of the fact that paired up with Nemon, we could be able to try to reuse Davis, so that's some really powerful synergy and combo play there. On top of the fact that we do have some other Tamers that we could try to take advantage of, so we could try to take advantage of the starter deck Matt, just because he could gain us some memory passively for the opponent not having any Digimon with inheritable sources on the field, and we could try to gain some memory with the Blue Joe if we really wanted to take that direction as well. And this is not even accounting for any other sub-packages of color splashes that we could think about incorporating into the deck as well, just because we could play with multiple different colors based on the types of synergies you're trying to look for and abilities you're trying to line up. But for the most part, this is just a core or shell for a solid budget deck for blue hybrids to be playing around with, and I think blue hybrids on a budget is still a relatively strong deck just because its core, for the most part, is intact on what it wants to be doing. The only real loss is with Davis as being the primary memory fixing tamer, but we at least have a substitute card to be replacing it with, so you could at least still play the deck. And as of right now, this deck should realistically only cost you around $20-$25 as of the recording of this video, depending on where you go to buy your singles. But the fact that we do have a very powerful deck to be playing with on a budget just makes the accessibility of the game even easier than it normally would be, and it just goes to show that there's a lot of different moving parts and pieces to really customize the deck to make it your own when you're ready to upgrade it. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below, and down in the description below are a couple of different ways you could support me and the channel. So I do have a TCG Player affiliate link, so when you use that link to buy cards off of TCG Player, then some of that money will go to supporting me and the channel. I also do make and sell playmats over on Overcard Gamers on Facebook, so when you buy a playmat with my design, then some of that money will also go to help supporting me and the channel. And on top of all of that, I do have a Twitch account over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu, so giving me a follow and a subscription also helps support me there, and I do play Digimon on top of various other games on that platform as well. So thank you everyone for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.